Hello, everyone. Antonio here again to continue the comprehensive world history class, lesson, or whatever you want to interpret it as being. We last ended on Buddhism's effect on Central Asia and its spread outward towards Eurasia and Greece and eastward to China. And now we're going to be moving on to Hinduism. Hinduism successfully transformed itself in the face of social change in India and competition from other worldviews, especially Buddhism. By 500 AD, Hinduism was the dominant worldview in India. Although it was not formally a missionary religion, its concepts and rituals spread with Indian merchants into Southeast Asia, where by 500 AD it became an important part of worldviews of royal courts in Cambodia, Java, and elsewhere in the region. Expansion of Christianity. Christianity began in the Eastern Mediterranean at the heart of the Hellenistic world among Jewish communities and in the context of the Roman Empire. It spread throughout the Mediterranean basin and in Roman Western Europe, competing with the variety of other popular religions. As Christianity spread, it took a number of distinctive forms. 312 to 395 AD, Roman Western Christianity received official toleration and support from emperors, leading to the Roman Empire becoming formally Christian. The Western Church was centered in Rome, where the Bishop of Rome as Pope claimed authority over all Christians. The Roman-led Church expanded into Western Europe and became the dominant worldview in the whole religion by the 7th to 8th centuries. 330 to 451 AD, the Eastern Orthodox Christianity developed in the older cities in Eastern Mediterranean and had its center in Constantinople, proclaimed the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire in 330s AD. The Eastern Church did not accept the primacy of the Bishop of Rome and developed doctrinally distinctive positions. It was the official church of the Byzantine Empire and spread through missionary activity into the Middle East and the Balkans. By the 6th century AD, the Eastern Church had the dominant church in those regions. 451 AD, Nestorian Church emerged as the dominant independent tradition after the Council of Chalcedon. This was part of the development of distinctive Christian church traditions in Egypt and Ethiopia in Africa, in the territories of the Sassanid Empire, and eventually into Central Eurasia. 200 AD to 500 AD, the classical ecumene developed as an interacting set of empires, religious communities, trade networks, and migrating peoples. Although imperial systems collapsed, in many areas by 500 AD, the broad ecumene continued to expand. Kingdoms of Western Asia and Africa to 323 BC, periodization. The early civilizations of Western Asia and Northeast Africa took shape in the 4th millennium BC. Two major centers arose in Mesopotamia and Egypt, each with quite different characteristics but recurrent contexts in war, trade, and culture. Mesopotamian history was marked by recurrent invasions, plus the formation of new empires and smaller kingdoms. Societies in contact with this civilization center fanned out in North Africa, Carthage, and Asia Minor. The long period in the histories of both Western Asia and Egypt extends from the formation of civilizations to the conquest first of the Persians, then of Alexander the Great. Mesopotamia, 3500 to 539 BC. Geography. Mesopotamia lay between and around the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The region reaches from the Taurus Mountains to the Persian Gulf and from the Syrian deserts to the Zagros Mountains, and splits into Upper and Lower Mesopotamia at the point where the rivers come closest together. Near ancient Babylon and modern Baghdad, Upper Mesopotamia is a large Piedmont zone flanked by semi-arid highlands. In the west, the Balik and the Kubar, or Kabur, flow south to the Euphrates, and in the east, the Great Zab and the Little Zab flow west from the Zagros into the Tigris. Lower Mesopotamia is an alluvial plain, and the Tigris and Euphrates form frequent lakes and marshes. The ancient shoreline of the Persian Gulf probably lay farther north than at present. Economy, technology, society, and culture. The staple crops in Mesopotamia were wheat and barley, along with the date palm. Drainage canals and irrigation works made the interior plain lower Mesopotamia highly productive, but irrigation led to salinization of the soil and decreased arable land. In upper Mesopotamia, the river flows through deep valleys and irrigation of the interior was not possible. Agriculture was confined to the river valleys and the interior was used primarily for pastoralism. The region had few natural resources except bitumen, but finished goods such as textiles and metalwork were exported. Originally, economic activity centered around temples, but eventually, kings and private individuals engaged in large-scale agriculture and trade. Technological advances in Mesopotamia during the early civilization period by 3000 or 2500 BC included the use of bronze for tools and weapons. Copper had been introduced earlier, but mixing it with tin for bronze created a much stronger equipment. Bronze use also prompted wider trade relations to gain access to metal ores. The production of plows increased crop yields. The wheel was probably imported by migrants from Central Asia like the early Hurrians. The potter's wheel, invented by 6000 BC, was further improved, an earlier sign of craft specialization. Architecture was sophisticated, but since most buildings were done in mud brick, examples have not survived as well as stone counterparts in Egypt and Greece. Immense ziggurats, stepped temple platforms, and large-scale palaces were built, and even private houses had drainage systems. Writing first developed in Mesopotamia. Its origins lay in clay tokens, used to count cattle as early as the 8th millennium. True writing, as opposed to pictographs, appeared around 3500 BC. Writing was done on clay with sharp reeds, producing a wedge-like cuneiform script. Originally used to write Sumerian, cuneiform was later adapted to Akkadian, Elamite, Hittite, Hurrian, Eblate, Ugaritic, Canaanites, and Old Persian. Many Sumerian and Akkadian myths survive, the best known being the Gilgamesh epic, describing the legendary exploits of a king of Uruk, fragments of which early 2nd millennium. The king lists provide important historical material, running with some gaps from around 2700 down to the 1st century BC. Economic and legal texts, letters, and scholarly works such as dictionaries, grammar books, and mathematical texts also survive. Mathematical texts contain tables of cube roots, exponential functions, and Pythagorean numbers. The Sumerians and Akkadians normally used a sexagesimal numbering system, the basis of our division of the hour and minute into 60 units. Mesopotamian society was organized around city-states. In early Sumerian times, a priest-king ruled as a representative of the city's god, assisted by an assembly of citizens or elders. Later, as multi-city states formed, a king, Sumerian Lugal, Akkadian Sharum, reigned, and each individual city was administered by a governor, an Ensi or Ishiakum. Sumerian and Akkadian religion eventually formed a common pantheon, and most gods had both a Sumerian and an Akkadian name. An Akkadian Anu was the first king of the gods, later replaced by the lord of the air, Enlil, and ultimately by Marduk, the city god of Babylon. Other major gods were Enki, or Ea, god of wisdom, Ninmah, mother of all life, Nana, Sin, the moon, Utu, also known as Shamash, the sun, Inanna, also known as Ishtar, the star of Venus, her husband, the shepherd god, Dumuzi, also known as Tammuz, and Ninurta, also known as Adad, the god of war. During the 5-day New Year festivals, Sumerians Zagmuk, Akkadian Akitu, a sacred marriage was performed between Enlil, later Marduk, in the person of the king and a priestess representing Inanna or Ishtar, ensuring fertility and the return of spring. The Sumerians and the Akkadians, 3500 to 2900 BC. The Proto-Literate period, 3500 to 3100. The Uric culture. It is uncertain whether the Sumerian were native or migrated into the region from the east or south sometime around 4000 BC. In any case, Semitic or Akkadian elements in the earliest texts suggest an early mixing of ethnic groups. In the Uric period, the population of Sumer was probably several hundred thousand, with some settlements large enough to be called cities, over 10,000 in population. The step temple platform, the ziggurat, and cylinder seals, so characteristic of Mesopotamian culture, developed. The first known writing, a small limestone tablet, comes from Kish and is dated to 3500 BC. At Uruk, several hundred clay tablets have been found, most dating to 3200 to 3100 BC. These, like the tablet from Kish, are too primitive to be read, but appear to be economic documents. 3100 to 2900, the Jimdet Nasser culture in the earlier Bronze Age. Tablets from Jimdet Nasser sites are clearly written in Sumerian, and almost all are economic texts. Bronze was first utilized in Mesopotamia, and there is evidence of extensive overseas trade. Mesopotamian influence appeared in pre-dynastic Upper Egypt, the so-called Mesopotamian stimulation. 2900 to 2370 BC, the early dynastic period. 2900 to 2700, the early dynastic, the first. The Sumerian kings list names 8 antediluvian kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years, but it is not known if these names have any historical basis. The royal tombs of Ur contain the graves of Meskelamdung and Akalamdug, among others, which probably date to this period. 2700 to 2600, early dynastic II. According to the King's List, the first dynasty after the Great Flood recorded in the Gilgamesh epic was the first dynasty of Kish. The last two kings, Enmebaragesi and his son Aga, are the first rulers attested in contemporary inscriptions. According to the King List, kingship, also known as Namlugal, then passed to the first dynasty of Uruk, which included Emerkar, Lugalbanda, and Gilgamesh, heroes of the epic tradition, and finally to the first dynasty of Ur. Epigraphic evidence, however, shows that these dynasties and a dynasty of Mari were all contemporary and date to 2700 to 2600 BC. Many rulers known from contemporary inscriptions are not found on the King's List. 2600 to 2370, early dynastic III. The King's List recorded 11 more dynasties before Sargon of Akkad, but except for the third dynasty of Uruk, little is known of them, and many were probably contemporaneous. The first dynasty of Lagash, Tilo, is well known from inscriptions, but not mentioned in the King List. It started with Meselim, but it was Eannatum of 2500 BC who conquered much of Sumer, extending Lagash's power from Elam and Mari. Uri Enem Gina of Lagash, 2378 to 2371, was the earliest known social reformer. He established freedom, also known as amargi, in the land, the first recorded use of the term in political sense. The third dynasty of Uruk had only one king, Lugal Zagesi, 2371 to 2347, beginning his career as governor, also known as Ensi, of Umma. He defeated Lagash and took the title King of Uruk. Lugal Zagesi claimed to rule from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Though this is doubtful, under his rule Akkadians began to rise to high positions in government. The population of Mesopotamia probably reached 500,000 in this period. 2371 to 2190, the dynasty of Akkad. Sargon the Great, also known as Sharukin, from 2371 to 2316, rose from obscure origins to become cupbearer or cupbearer to Zababa, king of Kish. Rebelling, he built the city of Agade or Akkad, whose site has not been located, and proclaimed himself king. After the legacy of Uruk, 2347, he conquered most of the rest of Sumer. Sargon installed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess of Ur. Enheduanna's hymns to Inanna have survived, making her history's first known author. Sargon went on to conquer Upper Mesopotamia. The Amorites, Amuru or Westerners, in Syria, Elam, and Subartu, also known as Assyria. Later legends fancifully describe conquests of Anatolia and Crete, but Sargon's empire certainly ranged from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Sargon's sons, Rimush, 2315 to 2307, and Menishtushu, 2306 to 2292, faced constant revolts. Both died in palace coups. Naram-Sin, 2291 to 2255, brought the kingdom of Akkad to its zenith. He was the first Mesopotamian king to claim divinity, as well as the first to be called king of the four quarters, that is, the world. Defeating the powerful state of Ebla in Syria, he extended his empire to Anatolia. Under Shar-Kali Shari, 2254 to 2230, Gutian tribes from the Zagros began raiding into Mesopotamia. Shar-Kali Shari was assassinated, and after him came a period of anarchy. An independent fourth dynasty of Uruk broke away and ruled parts of lower Mesopotamia. Around 2190, Akkad fell to the Gutians. 2230 to 2114, the Gutians. The king list records 21 Gutian kings, though most of them were probably local chiefs with only limited authority. Some cities, such as Lagash and Uruk, became independent, though their rulers retained the title of governor or ensi. Gudea of Lagash left inscriptions which contained the most important texts in classical Sumerian. Around 2114, Utu Higal of Uruk, 2120 to 2114, drove the Gutians out of Sumer, but died soon after. 2113 to 2004 BC. Third dynasty of Ur. The Sumerian Renaissance. Ur-Nammu, 2113 to 2096, of Ur proclaimed himself king and soon conquered all of Sumer and Akkad. He built and renovated many public buildings, including ziggurats. Ur-Nammu, whose stated purpose was to establish, quote, justice in the land, end quote, is best known for his law code. The re-establishment of central control to a rise in population. Mesopotamia probably had about 1 million inhabitants at the beginning of the second millennium. Shilgi, 2095 to 2048, brought the empire of Ur III to its height. He conquered Elam and Upper Mesopotamia and, like the Akkadian kings, he proclaimed himself the divine, quote, king of the four quarters, end quote. Shusin, 2038 to 2030, built a 150-mile-long wall between the rivers to defend against the encroaching Amorites. Nevertheless, in the reign of Ibbi-Sin, 2029 to 2006 BC, the Amorites invaded and established independent states in lower Mesopotamia. In 2025, Larsa became autonomous under Naplunim, and in 2017, Ishbi-Era established a dynasty at Isin. Eshnunna and Elan also broke away. In 2004, the Elamites attacked and destroyed Ur. The Amorite Kingdoms, 2004 to 1763. The Isin-Larsa period. In 2017 to 1794, the dynasty of Isin. Late in his reign, Ishbi-Era, 2017 to 1985, king of Isin, drove the Elamites from Ur. Ishme-Dagan, 1953 to 1935, was a social reformer. In Lipit, Ishtar, 1934 to 1924, left behind an important early law code. After 9 more kings, Demek-Elishu, 1816 to 1794, ruled as the last king of Isin. 2025 to 1763, the dynasty of Larsa. Naplunim was king of Larsa from 2025 to 2005, but it was Samium 1976 to 1942, who reestablished Larsa as a rival power to Isin. After a dynasty of 10 more kings, Ramsin, 1822 to 1763, brought Larsa to its largest extent, defeating Damik Ilishu of Isin and unifying Lower Mesopotamia. 2000 to 1763, Amorite and Elamite dynasties. While not mentioned in the king list, inscriptions show an independent dynasty at Eshnuna, some with Elamite names. Indeed, under Naram Sin, 1830, Eshnunna and Assyria may have been united. Other independent Amorite dynasties ruled in Kazalu, Sippar, Uruk, Kish, Marad, and most importantly at Babylon. 1900 to 1741 BC, the Old Assyrian period. In 1900 to 1813, the dynasty of Puzur-Ashur, the Assyrians probably originated as a nomadic tribe. The city of Ashur, Kalat Zarquat, is first mentioned in the reign of Sargon of Akkad in 2350. Around 1950, Puzur-Ashur I built the city's wall, and in 1900 BC, an Assyrian trading colony known as Karam was established at Kanesh in Anatolia, where tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets have been discovered. The Assyrian king Naram Sin in 1830 may be the same as the contemporaneous king Naram Sin of Ishnunna, and the two kings may have united under him. In any case, Naram Sin expanded Assyria's rule to the west. In 1813, an Amorite prince, Shamsi Adad, overthrew Irisham II in 1814 to become king of Assyria. 1813 to 1741, the dynasty of Shamsi Adad I, in 1813 to 1781, he conquered Mauri and expanded Assyrian power to the west. His son, Ishmi Dagan, 1780 to 1741, invaded Babylonia in an alliance with Elam, Ishnunna, and the Gutians, but was defeated by Hammurapi the Great. After Ishmi Dagan's death came a series of usurpations, and Assyria declined into 400 years of obscurity. 1830 to 1531, First Dynasty of Babylon, or the Old Babylonian Empire. The First Dynasty of Babylon was established under Sumu Abum, 1894 to 1881, but the reign of Sin Mubalit, 1812 to 1793, the city controlled a region running for 60 miles along the Euphrates. Hammurapi the Great, 1792 to 1750, took Uruk and Isin soon after his accession to the throne. For over 20 years, he concentrated on building and irrigation projects, organized a centralized administration, and issued the famous Law Code of Hammurapi. In 1764, Babylon was attacked by a coalition of Elam, Assyria, the Gutians, and Ishnunna, but Hammurapi defeated the coalition, annexed Ishnunna, and Elam, and expanded the empire to the borders of Assyria and the Zagros. The Babylonian king then took Larsa, made it his southern capital, and in 1759 defeated Mari and tore down its walls. In 1757 to 1755, Hammurapi defeated another Assyrian invasion, and when Eshnunna revolted, it was destroyed. Hammurapi now controlled all of Mesopotamia, with the exception of Assyria. In this period, the Amorites completely assimilated into Akkadian culture, adopting their language, religion, and culture. Two dialects of Akkadian were spoken, Babylonian in the south and Assyrian in the north. Sumerian survived only in scholarly writing. Marduk, god of Babylon, replaced Enlil as king of the gods. The Marduk temple complex in Babylon was expanded, including the great ziggurat Etemen Enki. Etemen Enki, also known as House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, the biblical Tower of Babel, also in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9. 1749 to 1595, the decline of the Babylonian Empire. In the reign of Samsuiluna, I hope I got that right, Samsuiluna, 1749 to 1712, the Kassites, also known as Kassu, made their first inroads into Babylonia and the Sea Lands. or the coastal region on the Persian Gulf, broke away from the empire. Under Abieshu, 1711 to 1684, and Amiditana, 1683 to 1647, the Kassites again invaded Babylon but were driven off. Saduqa, 1646 to 1626, made internal reforms, forgiving debt and freeing debt slaves. Samsuditana, 1625 to 1595, ruled for 30 years in relative peace, but in 1595 the Hittite king Mercillus marched into Mesopotamia and captured and plundered Babylon. The Hittites did not remain, but Babylonian authority was broken, allowing the Kassite seizure of power. The Kassites, the Hurrians, and the Aramaeans, 1700 to 1600. Kassite invasions. In the 17th century, the Kassites, or also known as Kassu, gradually moved into Babylonia from the northeast. After the Hittite raid on Babylon in 1595, the Kassites took the city. 1595 to 1150, the Kassite dynasty. Barna Buriash I in 1500 signed a treaty with Puzur Ashur III from 1521 to 1498 of Assyria, fixing their common boundaries. From this time, Upper Mesopotamia was known as Assyria and Lower Mesopotamia as Babylonia. Ulamburiash in 1450 took over the sea lands, and Kurigalzu I, 1400, the strongest of the Kassites, conquered Elam and entered into an alliance with Amenalphus III of Egypt in 1402 to 1364. During the reign of Kashtiliash IV, 1242 to 1235, Babylonia was conquered by the Assyrians, but after 7 years, its independence was recovered. In 1160, the Assyrians conquered the lower Zab regions, and the Elamites took Babylon itself, carrying off spoils, including the Code of Hammurabi, to Susa. Enlil-nadin Ahi, 1159 to 1139, was the last Kassite king of Babylon. 1156 to 1025, Second Dynasty of Isin. After the Kassite defeat, a new dynasty arose in Isin under Marduk-Kebit Aheshu, 1156 to 1139, which eventually retook Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar I, also known as Nabu Kuduri Usur, from 1124 to 1103, conquered Elam. Tiglath-Pileser I of Assyria defeated Marduk-Nadin Ahi in 1098 to 1081 and conquered Babylonia in 1365-1078. But the end of the second millennium, the population of Mesopotamia was probably around 1.25 million. 1700 to 1500, the Hurrian invasion. The Hurrians had lived in Mesopotamia in small numbers from the late 3rd millennium, but the major Hurrian invasions of the region began around 1700. By 1500, they had penetrated into all of Mesopotamia as well as Syria, Palestine, and eastern Anatolia. There are indications that they had been influenced by Aryans somewhere outside the Near East. Aryans worshipped gods later associated with the Iranians and Indians, such as Mithra and Varuna. The names of some Hurrian rulers and certain technical expressions in Hurrian texts, particularly in connection with the chariot, are Indo-European. The Hurrians adopted Mesopotamian religion and culture, utilizing Babylonian and as an administrative language in cuneiform script to write the Hurrian language. Despite the large number of surviving texts, the Hurrian language remains undeciphered. 1550 to 1250. The Kingdom of Mitanni. Sudarna I, 1550, created the Hurrian Kingdom of Mitanni with its capital at Washukani on the Khabur River. Tatar, 1500, expanded the kingdom, and eventually the kings of Mitanni ruled all of Upper Mesopotamia and much of Syria, from the Orontes to the Little Zab. In 1475, Thutmosis III conquered Syria and pillaged Mitanni, but Egyptian control did not extend east of the Euphrates. Both Artadama I in 1450 and Sudarna II in the 1400s made marriage alliances with the Egyptians. After Sudarna's death, a civil war broke out between his two sons, Tushratta 1390 to 1370, and Anithema II, and was continued by their sons, Matiwazi and Sudarna III. This infighting and the plundering of Washukanis by the Hittites, 1680 to 1500, led to the kingdom's decline. Finally, Ashur-uballit I of Assyria attacked Mitanni and pillaged it. Shalmaneser I defeated the last Hurrian king. Shatuara II and the Hurrians were absorbed into the Assyrian Empire around 1270. 1365 to 1078. The Middle Assyrian Empire. Ashur-uballit I, 1365 to 1330, expanded the Assyrian domain to the north and the west. Amenophis IV, also known as Akhenaten of Egypt, as an equal. Adad-nirari I, 1307 to 1275, defeated the Babylonians and conquered the Hurrian city-states. Shalmaneser I of 1275-1245 continued his predecessor's energetic campaigns of conquest, fighting in the far north against Urartu and again crushing the Hurrians, annexing their lands. He conquered the lands up to Carchemish, but an Egyptian-Hittite treaty signed in 1283, which divided Syria between them, frustrated the Assyrians' westward movements. Tukulti-Ninurta I, 1244 to 1208, the biblical Nimrod, you can find that in Genesis, the 10th chapter, verses 8 through 12, conquered Babylon, but only held it for 7 years. Tukulti-Ninurta also promulgated the Middle Assyrian Law Code, a continuation of the Sumerian and Babylonian legal tradition, and built a new capital, Ninurta, also known as Tlol el-Akir, across the Tigris from Ashur. Tukulti-Ninurta was murdered by his son in a palace coup, and Assyria entered into an 85 period of weakness. When the invasion of the Sea Peoples around 1200 destroyed the Hittite Empire and pushed the Egyptians out of Asia and created a power vacuum in the region, Tiglath-Pileser I, also known as Tukulti, Apal-Esser, 1115 to 1077, quickly took advantage of the situation. In a series of campaigns, he conquered a large empire from the Zagros to the Mediterranean, and from Babylon north to Urartu. Tiglath-Pileser initiated the policy of ruthless warfare, mass executions, and the deportation of civilian populations, which became characteristic of Assyrian conquest. 1078 to 977. The Aramean invasions. In the 11th century, Aramean tribes from the Syrian desert, including the Chaldeans, invaded Mesopotamia. The Assyrians were driven back into Assyria proper, and Babylonia was overrun and broken up into smaller tribal states. The coastal region retained its independence from 1024 to 1004 under the Second Sealand dynasty, but subsequently this area was conquered by the Chaldeans, who ruled southernmost Babylonia. The Neo-Assyrians and the Neo-Babylonians, 934 to 824 BC. The establishment of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Ashur-dan II, 934 to 912, built up a new Assyrian Empire. Further conquests were carried out by Adad-nirari II, 911 to 890, Tukulti-Ninurta II, 890 to 884, and Ashur-nasir-apli II, from 883 to 859, by which time the Assyrians again ruled from the Tigris to the Mediterranean and from the Lake Van to the borders of Babylonia. Ashur-nasir-apli was the chief architect of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, developing its centralized bureaucracy and building Calah, also known as Nimrud, as the capital. Its palaces and temples combined traditional Mesopotamian mud brick architecture with monumental stone sculptures and wall reliefs. 858 to 824. The reign of Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser III began integrating conquered areas into the empires and provinces. Vassals who could not yet be wholly subjugated paid tribute. Shalmaneser moved west to conquer the Aramean kingdoms of Syria. Though initially stopped at the Battle of Karkar 853 by a coalition of Israel. There was a civil war between two of his sons, which led to a period of Urartian domination. 824 to 745, Urartian domination of Assyria. Shamshi Adad V, 823 to 811, took the throne after defeating his brother. Though parts of the empire were lost, he was succeeded by his minor son, Adad Nirari III, 810 to 783. For the first 4 years of the child's reign, his mother, Semiramis, Greek Semiramis, ruled as regent. Adad Nirari briefly reimposed tribute on the western states, including Israel. But increasingly, Assyria retreated before Urartu. Commagene and Melitene in southern Anatolia and Carchemish in Syria came under Urartian control, and Assyria became practically a vassal of Urartu. 745 to 626, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. 744 to 77, the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, the son of Nirari III. Tiglath III introduced the period of the Assyrian Empire years 778. The Urartians and their allies defeated Adad. It was a coalition of 5. Tiglath-Pileser III Urartians in the next region around the Lake Urmia. He subdued Damascus and Israel, annexing all of Damascus' territory and the Israelite provinces of Gilead and Galilee, all of which were made into Assyrian provinces. In 731, a revolt broke out in Babylon. After crushing it, Tiglath-Pileser named himself king of Babylon. 727-05, Shalmaneser V and Sargon II. Shalmaneser V, 726 to 722, was immediately faced with the new rebellion in the west. Both Tyre and Samaria, the capital of Israel, were besieged. Samaria fell late in 722 after a 3-year siege, shortly before the death of Shalmaneser, but Tyre held out. When Sargon II, 721 to 705, mounted the throne, another revolt broke out in Babylon under Merodach Baladan II, which Sargon failed to quell initially. In 720, Sargon moved west, reconquering Hamath, Samaria, Ekron, and Gaza. King Ahaz of Judah paid tribute, and Tyre finally capitulated after a 5-year siege. In 717 and 716, Sargon took and annexed Carchemish and defeated the Egyptians at Raphia. The farthest west the Assyrians had yet penetrated. Urartu was again crushed in 714, and in 712 the Assyrians took Ashdod and annexed Philistia. Finally, in 709, the revolt in Babylon was suppressed, and Merodach Baladan went into exile in Elam. Sargon built a new capital, which he named Dur-Sharrukin, also known as Khorsabad. 704 to 681, the reign of Sennacherib, also known as Sin-Ahi-Iriba. In 703, Merodach Baladan II again seized power in Babylon. And though Sennacherib quickly put down the revolt, resistance continued for the next 13 years. Sennacherib campaigned to the north, taking tribute from the Medes, then west, defeating the Egyptians at the Battle of Eltekeh in 701. Next, it was Judah's turn, and Sennacherib besieged Jerusalem. But when King Hezekiah paid tribute to the Assyrians, the Assyrians broke off the siege. In 689, Babylon revolted again, and with Elamite assistance, but was sacked and burned to the ground. Sennacherib transformed Nineveh into the east bank of the Tigris into a city of unparalleled splendor, and it remained the Assyrian capital until the end of the empire. In the 7th century, the population of Mesopotamia reached a height, until modern times, of around 2 million inhabitants. Sennacherib's eldest son had died before him, so he designated his youngest son, Esarhaddon, as heir. This led to a revolt by his older sons and the king's assassination. 680 to 669, the reign of Esarhaddon. With the active assistance of his mother, Nakia, known in Greek as Nitocris, Esarhaddon had put a revolt by his brothers. He then rebuilt Babylon and made one of his sons, Shamash-Shum-Ukin, its king, and gave another son, Ashurbanipal, the title of king of Assyria. While Scythian and Cimmerian tribes appeared on Assyrian's northern border, Esarhaddon was preoccupied with plans to conquer Egypt. The Assyrian invasions of Egypt, 674 to 673, were unsuccessful, but Esarhaddon struck with full force in 671, routed the pharaoh Taharka, and took Memphis. In 669, Esarhaddon went to Egypt to prepare for an invasion of Ethiopia, but fell sick and died. 668 to 627, the reign of Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal was both a great military commander and a patron of arts and letters. His palace reliefs are among the finest examples of Assyrian art, and he gathered a great library of tablets, which remains one of our main sources for knowledge of Sumero-Akkadian literature. The king boasted he could read and write the cuneiform script. Ashurbanipal attacked Egypt and in 2 campaigns, 667 to 666 and 664 to 663, defeated Pharaoh Taharka and his sons Tinuatuman, and extended Assyrian power as far as Thebes. In 652, Shamash Shuma Ukin tried to overthrow his brother with Elamite help, and civil war raged until 648. When Shamash Shuma Ukin finally surrendered in Babylon, Susa was taken and sacked in 639, but the civil wars had revealed Assyria's weakness to its enemies. 626 to 609, the last days of Assyria. The Assyrian Empire collapsed quickly. There was apparently a revolt on Ashurbanipal's death, and his son Ashur-etil-ilani in 626 ruled only a few months. The usurper Sin-Shum-Lishar of 626 also kept the throne only a short period. At this point, the Chaldean Nabopolassar declared himself king of Babylon. Sin-Shar-Ishkan, 626 to 612, another son of Ashurbanipal, took back the throne of Assyria and stabilized the internal situation. Soon, however, Cyaxares, king of the Medes, and the Babylonian king Nabopolassar joined forces to attack Assyria. After a protracted struggle, Nineveh fell in 612 and was completely destroyed. An Assyrian noble, Ashur-uballit II, 611 to 609, proclaimed himself king at Haran in Syria. The Babylonians took Haran in 610. However, an attempt by the Assyrians, now allied to the Egyptians, to retake the city failed. Ashur-uballit died in obscurity. 977 to 626, the 8th and the 9th dynasties of Babylon. After a period of political confusion, Nabu-Mukin-Apli, 977 and 942, reestablished an 8th dynasty of Babylon. Though his rule did not extend far beyond the city itself, while unimportant politically, Babylon continued to be a cultural and intellectual center. Under Nabu-Nasir, also known as Nabu-Nasir, 747 and 734, an important calendar reform was instituted in which the monthly lunar cycle was reconciled with the solar year, a standard system still used in the Jewish calendar. In 731, an Aramaean dynasty came to power under Nabu-Mukin, Zeri, 731 to 729, and the first use of Aramaic is attested in the Babylonian documents. The Assyrians conquered Babylon in 728, but the Chaldean king Merodach Baladan II, Marduk, also known as Marduk-apal-iddina, drove them out. From 710 to 626, the Chaldean kings, often supported by Elam, alternated with Assyrian rulers. That's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I will be back soon to continue the comprehensive history of the world. My name is Antonio. Take care.